Anoushka Shankar sur Pure Channel. Hi Anoushka.
Hello.
It's a real pleasure to talk about that record Traveller that will be released in France in middle of October, 14th of October. Thank you very much for coming here. I have many questions. I've listened to that record since a few weeks. My first question is to know how did you came to that very peculiar mix of Spanish music and your music, the sitar instrument, of course. Was it because the Spanish Hispanic music was already a mixed music in between North African culture and European culture? Was it what?
Well, first of all, the desire to work with flamenco music is because I love flamenco. So that's where the original desire comes from. But beyond that, I think a lot of people don't know, but you can actually trace the flamenco music back all the way to India, because you have the gypsies from India who were traveling as nomadic peoples from the 12th and 13th century and traveled all the way through Central Asia, Eastern Europe, and landed up in Spain. And in Spain, in the music, you can hear, if you are familiar with Indian classical music or Indian folk music, you can hear a lot of similarities in the rhythmic structures, in some of the instruments, in the vocal styles. And I've always been very curious about that connection between the Spanish and Indian music, and so we wanted to explore that.
Yeah, you explore it. So you didn't invent that connection. It was rooted in years of history. But you're right. You're totally right that the moments, the music, the themes of the guitar, flamenco guitar, and your sitar totally mix. And the voices also, many examples of songs. I think it's Boys and Girl that is mixed, the sitar mixed with a very romantic Hispanic guitar. And there are many moments also where the voice is in the singer, the Spanish singer, are in very peculiar flamenco melodies. And then suddenly it turns out and it becomes an Indian melody. From my very far point of view, I'm not an expert. Did you have the sensation while growing and working on the sitar that it was a universal instrument that could be mixed with any kind of music? Were you raised in that idea that the sitar could be universal?
I don't know if I thought about it much at the beginning, because I was raised very much learning the Indian classical tradition, and so it's a very kind of deep focus on that one tradition, and the sitar is very much representative of Indian classical music. People really recognize and associate those together. But sometimes as I was growing up and playing, I would feel the desire to explore out of that context. I grew up around my father, who of course was also very experimental, even though he was very much in the classical tradition as well. So I heard him doing duets with orchestras and with Western flute and violin, and with all these amazing musicians from different cultures. And I did want to push that forward, because at the end of the day, it's Indian classical music, which is very deep, very ancient, but it's also an instrument which can be played in other ways, and that can be quite challenging. It has limitations, because the sitar is built for Indian classical music. So, for example, a guitar is built harmonically to fit with harmonic music, and the sitar isn't. So there are limitations that you have to work around.
I was wondering, there's a lot of solo part where your sitar plays in a very Hispanic way, flamenco way, and I was wondering if technically it was very complicated to find by this game and structures of solo parts. Was it a tremendous work, or you had to reinvent the way you play sitar to play that music?
Sometimes I had to work to develop small techniques that were new to me, in order to fit with the flamenco style or the rhythm, and I would take inspiration from a guitar. But a lot of the times it was also finding parallels in the Indian tradition. Like, a lot of the times when people thought in Spain, they would hear me and go, wow, she's playing perfect flamenco there, how does she know that? I actually wasn't. I was playing something purely Indian. And it was about finding the ways to have them work together.
The percussions are very important in the music. Did you had also did you work a lot on producing those very traditional rhythms in a modern way
I did. I think the last couple of records I've made that have been slightly less classical, purely Indian classical, I've gone for a very kind of full, rich, modern sound. And the main issue is having a big bass, of course, because in classical records you tend not to have that. And I've grown up and have always listened to many styles of music, and I do love the kind of full, modern, rich sound that we have in all other genres. And so when I was working with the producer, Javier Limon, he's an amazing producer. He's a big part of why we have this sound. He and I talked about that at the beginning and said, okay, well, the music should have that quality, that it's ancient, that it's rich, but the sound should also be very accessible. It should have that really kind of strong rhythms and really driving beats, and it's all acoustic. You know, it was just how we recorded things, how we mixed it, using sometimes lots more percussion than necessary to really make it full and big. Yeah,
It moves a lot, and sometimes there are progressions that are almost electros. You know, puedo verla. It's, you know, it goes. It's almost electronic.
yeah.
Another thing that is amazing on that record is that you let a lot of spaces to the other instruments, and there's a whole game. I was wondering if it's traditional in the Indian composition. There's a lot of response with the guitar, with the piano on Burlería con Ricardo Ito. Each time you respond and you let time to the instruments, to your instrument, to the solist instruments.
Yeah.
This is also a touch you wanted to give to that. Well, you always did.
I think I always do that. I think I love other musicians. I love other instruments, and if they're there, I want them to play as well. I think the sitar is very strong on this record. That it's always the kind of lead instrument, but I don't feel the need to dominate everything. You know, and if the piano's playing, I want him to take a solo. If someone's singing, I want them to be free. You know, and you touched on something important. That kind of idea of sharing and going back and forth is a very Indian thing. We do that a lot when there are duets, or even between the vocalist or the instrumentalist and the percussion. You do take turns and kind of try rhythmic ideas back and forth and kind of play in a repeating way. It's very traditional.
I'm trying to look what song. There's a song where, it's Dancing in Madness, an amazing song. There are dancers, by the way, in the recording. and well, after 2 minutes 40, there's and change with the percussion, and they look like they are distortion percussions.
Yeah.
It's very.
It's not actually. It's an amazing instrument from the south of India called the mridangam, and it's a long two-faced drum. And on the high side, it has this really big buzzing sound that when you just hit an open, sort of, it kind of has that. Yeah, it sounds like a distortion actually. So it's just him, me, and then the two dancers, the flamenco dancer and the Indian Bharatanatyam dancer.
An amazing track, Dancing in Madness. Another question I was wondering, and I was wondering, did you start with a story when you compose a song? Did you start with something you want to tell?
It depends on if I'm working with lyrics or not. If I'm working with lyrics, then I always write in English first and then we translate. But I'm very comfortable with thinking of a situation and writing about it. But sometimes that comes from the melody first, sometimes it comes with the lyrics first. But if I'm working with melody, it's more of a feeling. It's not always a very elaborate idea, but it can be a very specific feeling that can be from a situation. But I tend not to come up with a big story for it because it's just being played.
Yeah, and anyway, we made the story while listening.
Yeah, I think that's important. I like that. That's one of the things I love about instrumental music is that I could have a story, but actually my story doesn't matter. Once I've made the music, it's whatever somebody else wants to hear.
What is amazing is that we do hear your voice with your instruments. That, I think, is one of the more peculiar touch of your record. We do hear your voice, other things. Last question. I'm always talking with musicians, pop musicians, rock musicians. When you travel, when you do work too, what sounds, what rhythm, what things do you bring back? And many times they're like some records, some stuff like that, but not really full influences. This record is called Traveler, and you seem to pick up everywhere the music.
Well, not always. I mean, I don't want to make myself sound better than I am, because sometimes you are so busy that you just go and you travel every morning, you do a show every day, and I don't like that because you do kind of miss where you are, you know. But if I have even 1 free day, 2 free days, I do try and go, you know, wherever I am, and I try and find out what concerts are happening or who's playing. I mean, this record is because of traveling for me. It's because I was traveling in Spain when I was a teenager, and I used to go to flamenco bars and hear people, and that's how that developed into this. And similarly, my past 2 records and things before are about, you know, the things that I've heard everywhere and what comes of that.
Thank you very much, Anoushka. I have a last question. I told you in French, a lot of people mix up with the sitar. Is it a she or he? and I'm going to ask you. You said previously, my father will say it's a she. Why do you think it's a he?
Well, I think it's how I think of my instrument. It's male to me, you know. But I think my father really kind of is in love with his instrument like a woman. So I think we personify our instruments as whatever we think. Yeah. So to me, it's a boy.
Un sitar. Thank you very much.
Thank you.